At this time, a doctor from Urella rang me up and said that he had a patient with poliomyelitis in Armidale Hospital, and they were very worried about him. And he heard that we had some patients in Tamworth and wondered if I'd come up and have a look at him, because they hadn't had done this treatment before, and to make it more urgent, the patient was a man called Max Taylor, who was my son-in-law. So I went up the next day and saw Max, and he was very ill indeed. He had paralysis of his arms and his legs, and he was having a bit of trouble with his breathing. So I stayed there for a couple of days, and I was sitting beside him one day when he stopped breathing. His pulse also stopped, and the hospital had the sense to install a special machine in the ward called a breathing machine, and called an iron lung. So we quickly opened the iron lung, lifted Max from the ordinary bed, put him in the iron lung, which was like a large coffin, and it was completely enclosed, airtight, and the head, and just the head was protruding the end of the coffin, and it had a rubber collar which sealed it and made it airtight. Associated with this machine was a large set of bellows, which was worked by an electric motor. We turned the motor on and got the bellows going, and they worked backwards and forwards. At this time, the word had got out that Max Taylor's brother, who was playing cricket on the oval just near the hospital, had died. So they stopped the cricket match and had a minute's silence in respect to Max's brother. And while they were having a minute's silence, I was having 2 or 3 minutes silence, trying to get this patient back to life. Eventually the bellows working caused breathing to start, compressing his chest and relaxing it, and pressing it, relaxing it. He started to breathe under artificial means, and his pulse returned, and he was back to life. And that was a wonderful thing to see his pulse come back. One of the problems with this iron lung, when they had to change him or dress him or change his clothes or do his toilet, you had to open the box, and of course he stopped breathing, so we had to artificially get his breath going while the nurses were doing what they had to do. And another problem was, at that time of the year, Armidale were having frequent blackouts. So my father had a business in Armidale which had a large number of men working for him, so he got all the men out, and they formed a group that if there was a blackout, they'd come straight up to the hospital and form a group who'd keep the bellows going by working them by hand. This happened on a couple of occasions, and it was great to have a relief work which kept Max alive. There's a terrible existence in this thing, lying on your back with your head out just looking at the ceiling. But he was attended by some very, very good nurses, week after week after week, and one of those wonderful nurses now lives in Tamworth. Her name is Paz Fennick. She was a wonderful girl. And Max went on for many, many weeks. A specialist came up from Sydney, had a look at him and made a statement that Max would never walk again. Thank goodness he was wrong. When he did get better, he had, of course, a lot of physiotherapy, had to have some sort of calipers on his legs and a lot of physiotherapy. So it took months for his muscles to come back to order. But eventually he went back to his sheep farm. He couldn't ride a horse, but he was able to handle a motorbike. And he lived on, looked after his wife and kids. And eventually, at the end of his life, he sold the farm and retired to a small unit. And he died just a few years ago, but he did have a good life, so he was a very lucky fellow to be alive. The next thing I want to mention, there was a bad respiratory disease in Armidale at that time. It was called, I was in Tamworth this time, called it's called Laringo, Laringo, Tachio, T-A-R-C, Tachio, T-A-R-C-A-I-O, Tachio bronchitis. This affected the larynx in the throat and caused great swelling of the vocal cords. They used to swell so much that they obstructed the airway, and the call I got was for a little boy who was having trouble breathing. So I hopped in the car and whizzed around and had a look at him, and there he was, really in trouble. He was unable to breathe. He was getting terribly dark around the face and really struggling. So I had a pocket knife, which I mentioned before. I took it out and I made a hole in his trachea, which immediately let some air in. He was able to breathe. We put him in the back of the car, took him up to the hospital, admitted him straight away, and put a proper trachycardia airway in his trachea, and he got over that and got over the disease, went out happy and healthy, his trachea hole closed up, and he lived a good life. He's probably still alive today. His name was Billy Thorpe. He was about 8 years old. So that was one good job done. The next thing I want to mention is obstetrics. When I was at the university, we had a professor who was a wonderful teacher. And he's the sort of teacher that when he talked to you and lectured you, you remembered it and it stuck in your mind. And he was a very good bloke and a wonderful teacher. And I also learned quite a lot when I was a resident at the Royal Hospital for Women in Paddington. And many a night, in the middle of the night, alone, and the patient's having a baby, the baby didn't want to come in, didn't want to be born, or the pulse was fading, and baby's heart sound was crook, or something was wrong, and I was worried. And I remembered the great words of the professor, and many times he gave me the answer, and I did what he told me, and we got through. But occasionally it worried me so much that I had to ring one of my partners, and they'd come up and give me a hand, and we'd deliver the baby all right. But it was a great feeling to know that there was someone always to give you a hand, because even though I'd been well trained, you had to learn an awful lot to be able to deliver all the babies we had to do. And all the GPs looked after their own babies at this time. Another thing that concerned us with obstetrics, if a patient was Rh negative, as a type of blood group, and the husband was Rh positive, and the baby that they had was the same as the husband, Rh positive, and the baby's blood caused the mother's blood, Rh negative, to produce antibodies to the baby's blood. And when the baby was born, the baby with blood containing antibodies caused the red blood cells to break open and liberate hemoglobin, which caused jaundice, and the baby's got very jaundiced and got a lot of damage to the brain system and the nervous system, and could either die or become affected with spastics. So what you had to do was to get rid of the Rh positive antibodies, and so you had to get rid of the baby's blood. And to do that, you had to exchange his blood. So I used to put a catheter up the vein in the umbilical cord, and I'd take 10 mils of blood out of the baby's body and discard that, and then insert 10 mils of NARH negative blood that had no antibodies, and then insert 10 mils in, take 10 mils out again, discard it, insert 10 mils of fresh normal blood, take 10 mils out, take 10 mils in. And you do this, 10 mils out, 10 mils out, 10 mils in, for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And we used to do that at night, and the night the baby's born, or the next night. And it was a labour of love, because it was tiring, and we just kept at it and kept at it. But we reckon we could replace the baby's blood by about 81%. So we got rid of the baby's blood and replaced it with new blood, about 80% of the total. And that saved their lives and saved any nasty post-natal troubles.